It's time to stitch the birdhouse and 2 more sashing blocks for our hometown quilt. The birdhouse is on page 30. I have all of my fabrics and they have all been backed with fusible interfacing, and I have my batting. As a reminder, I have not cut my fabrics to size, and the way that I know which fabrics I need for a block is to just go to the directions and I will pull all of the fabrics that they list, and I will go through all of the directions and pull my fabrics. Then once I make this block and I use the fabrics, I will put this back into the packet for another block. For the sashings, I am working on sashing 6 and 7. They are on pages 76 and 78. They will only use these 2 fabrics, and these are what is left of my original strips. So I will use these first, and then I've pulled out 2 additional strips and I have the batting. These have also been backed with fusible interfacing. Now remember, the last sashing blocks that I did were sashings 5 and 10, and they were the longer sashing blocks that go to the very right, and I skipped over 6 through 9. So now I'm back to working on 6 and 7. So let's start the birdhouse and 2 more sashing blocks. I'll go to embroidery and to my USB and open my combined files house folder and bring in the birdhouse, which is house 4, and hit set, and embroidery. I like to go to the minus plus needle in case I need to move forward or backwards, stitches or steps. And the first step will be the placement of the batting. I will lay the batting down and then run the placement for the fabric. So with this placement line, I am going to place my sky fabric and I am going to line it right up with that line, having just about equal amounts of fabric past the batting. Then I'm going to take my grass fabric right side down and I will line it right up with the sky fabric. And it will do the tack down of the fabric. And then I'm going to flip and fold and press. I have a wool pressing mat just right in front of my machine because this project, there is a lot of taking the hoop in and out and several flip and folds, and so I just have this on the front. So I'm going to take my fabric and finger press, and then I am going to take an iron. You don't necessarily need an iron. You could just finger press, you could tape just to get it to lie flat. And the next step is going to run is the tack down. And again, I do have my dark thread in, so that will help me when I'm trimming up the block. And then I will start on the quilting. It will do the grass quilting and then the sky. So I guess I really wasn't paying attention as this started to stitch, and if you notice that it did not start catching my bobbin until almost the grass, and then it looks like it finished off pretty good. So I am going to go ahead and just cut this piece that didn't really get tacked down, and I'm going to restitch that. I do want to have this tacked down with all the embroidery and quilting we're going to do. And so this is where this screen comes in handy. If you're not already on the minus plus needle, of course you would just get to this screen. And so the next step, you can see that it's going to be doing the quilting on the grass, but I need to go back to the beginning of this step. So I'm going to use my up arrow, and now you can see it's back at the step where it tacks it down. So I am going to go ahead and start, and I think when it just gets down to the grass where it caught, I am just going to stop my machine, and then I'll show you what I'm going to do. So it caught that time, and so now that it's coming down to the bottom, I'm just going to stop my machine, and I'm just going to cut the thread. And that's just because, again, all of this, somehow it caught, and I don't need to go over that. Of course, I could have just doubled up on that tack down. That wouldn't have been a big deal. But I want to show you now what I need to do. So now that I stopped and cut my thread, you can see this little green plus sign thinks that, of course, it still needs to finish out this step, which technically it does, but I've already have that done. So now I can come back again to this screen, and I'm going to use my down arrow and go to the next step. And that will put me back to where it would have been if I didn't have that issue. So now I'm ready to quilt the grass. And so that's why I like to be on this screen. It's super fast and easy to just go back if there's an issue. Of course, it's always easy to get to that screen as well. All right, so now let's finish the quilting. So now starting on the block, most of this is just straight applique. There is one flip and fold, which I will do like the directions instead of the way I did it on my last block. And normally I would just have left in this kind of pearl color thread for the placements because I can see that in person. However, I have changed to just a really light green so that it would be easier to see. I'll run the placement stitches, and I'll put the fabric down and tack down and trim. Let's start the applique. This is the placement line that just stitched, and that is to line up the fabric for the flip and fold. I need to place this fabric right side down, just like I did the grass, and I will line it up even with the placement, making sure there's a little bit of excess fabric on each side of that line, and then run the tack down. Now that this piece is stitched down, I'm going to flip it, and I'm going to finger press, and then I'm also going to press with an iron. You could tape it or use a little roller to make this seam flat so that this lays flat. And now it's going to run the tack down. But as you can see, just like our grass, even though this is going to have a satin stitch, this really is a finished seam. All right, let's tack this down and keep going. I've trimmed the extra fabric, and now it's going to run a satin stitch. After the satin stitching, we'll continue with the appliques, and these are just straight appliques where I will run the placement line, I will place the fabric, tack it down, and trim. So on the chimney and door, after it got done tacking the chimney down, I went ahead and manually stopped my machine, cut this little piece so that I could use my same strip and tack down the door. And now I will trim and get ready to run the satin stitching. You could easily just cut two separate pieces and not have to stop your machine. So I just got done with the satin stitching around the door, this little roof, and the chimney, and the doorknob. And I ended up using a little bit lighter color, and the doorknob doesn't show up. So I am going to only stitch that doorknob with the darkest brown that I have. But I need to get back to that part of the design. So if you'll look at the screen, of course, we're done with the step that did those satin outlining, and I'm on this little roof on top of the door. I need to get back to the doorknob. Now there's two ways to do it. I can use the up arrow, and that will take me all the way back to the beginning of the satin stitch, and then I could use my plus needle, like 100 at a time. There's a lot of satin stitching, and cycle through the chimney, the little roof, the door until it gets to the doorknob. But because that doorknob was the very last thing that was stitched, instead of going through all of that, I can just start by going back from this screen instead of going back to the step. So I hope that makes sense. So I'm on the following step, but if I go even back just one, so if I go -1, it jumps back where you can see all of the satin stitching I just did, but I need to get to the very first part of that doorknob, because right now I'm on that very last stitch, and it would take one stitch and it would be done. So I don't know how many stitches the doorknob is, not very many, so I could try the back 10, but I'm just going to go the -1 until it jumps to the door. And then I'll know that. So I could have done at least 110. Oh, there's more stitches in that little doorknob than I thought. All right, so it's got to be close to being done. Okay, so I definitely could have done probably -10 at least a couple of times, but that's fine. So you can see it jumped back to the end of that last satin stitching of the door. And so now I need to go +1 because I need to get back to the doorknob, but I needed to make sure to get to the very first stitch of the doorknob. So if I go +1, it jumps to the doorknob, and now I know that I can just start my machine. I have the dark thread in. I can just go, and it will stitch just that doorknob in my dark color. And I like that much better. I can see the doorknob, and now if I come back to the screen, you can see now it's back to that next step, which is this little roof over the door, and I'm ready to go. The next several appliques, I'm just going to leave that dark brown in. It's just going to do the placement and the tack down, and then we'll go from there. I just finished the satin stitching on the bird, and it's really not as smooth if you look at this satin stitching down on the house, or the door, anywhere, chimney. You might be able to see that it's not the greatest satin stitching. So I went ahead and changed my needle, even though I put a new needle in when I started the project. I am not going to go back over that in case it makes it even worse. So I'm just going to leave it and go on to the wing. Now I do want to note that the next step outlines the wing with satin stitches, and then it jumps right next to it and does a little eye. But you can see that my fabric has this little dark flower, and it looks pretty close to where they're going to put the eye. And so after the satin stitch gets done on the wing and it cuts the thread, I'm going to, like I have in the past, I'm going to manually stop my machine and just be done. I'm not going to do the eye at all. I think that that looks like his eye. It's about in the right spot. And I'm afraid that if I go and do the eye, it's going to, be off center and it's going to look kind of weird. So I'm taking advantage of the print in this fabric and have that be the eye. All right, so let's finish up this bird. Now that I stopped my machine, of course, it still thinks that it needs to do that little eye. And so again, I'm going to come to the minus plus needle screen, which I stitch with that on, and I am just going to use my down arrow and move to the next step, which is starting the applique for the trees. Also, for the applique of the trees, I switched to my brown color. That will be the next visible color, and that will be for the branches and trunks of the trees. So I'm going to go ahead and switch, doing the applique in that color. So I'm getting ready to do the satin stitch outline for the windows, and I want to make a note that I was wrong about the satin stitching along this flip and fold. Now there are houses like we had last week where I didn't do the flip and fold and it was covered with satin stitches, and there are houses coming up that will have a flip and fold and satin stitches. This one is not one of them. So you can see that this flip and fold is perfect because it leaves a nice finished edge, just like our grass, and there will be no other stitches. So the only thing I'm thinking of is maybe they decided that anytime there were a flip and fold pieces to the side of the houses, that they do them all the same just for consistency, whether or not they have satin stitches. And that's the only thing I can think of. So last week there were two little sections on each side of the house that were flip and fold and had satin stitches. Again, maybe it's consistency. So if there's a little side piece of the house, it's always done the same way. That's That's my thinking now. All right, so let's finish this block up. We have a few more steps. So I am done stitching this birdhouse out, and I'm not really sure what's going on, but it just overall did not stitch out as well as the other houses that I've done so far. And I did have several problems where I had to rethread my top thread and it did shred. And so maybe it's my machine, I need to take it in. But even before that started happening, way back on the bird, remember I mentioned that that just didn't look as good as I thought it should. You can see the wing should have some decorative stitching. That just, I mean, you can tell it's starting to do the decorative, but it just doesn't look as good as the other ones. Same with the roof. They're just not as clean as the other houses. You can see, I think right here, you can see the tack down of the roof. You shouldn't be able to see that. There was one more down here on the bottom of the house. I'm not sure you can see, but I can see the tack down that I shouldn't be able to see. You might note that on all of the houses, they have this really cool decorative stitch, kind of similar to the roof and the wing. And you can tell that just does not look like the other houses that I've done. And I'm not really sure what's going on. Maybe it's my machine. I mean, some of them stitched out really nice. I think this tree branch looks pretty good. I'm not really sure. I'm not totally happy with the way this stitched out. Again, it could be my machine. I may just have to take it in and do some quilting while that's being worked on. And I think I may, in the end, restitch this. For now, I'm going to leave it. But I had some problems with this block. So let's try the sashings, and I guess that might determine if it's actually my machine. If I have some issues stitching the sashings out, that will probably tell me if it's my machine or if it's the block. I know I did all of the updates. I guess I should go back and check to see if there's been additional. I checked not long ago and I have done all the updates. I'm not sure if the birdhouse was included in those updates that I did, but anyway, so let's go on and we'll see how the sashings do. All right, so before starting the sashing blocks, I went to do a little research and there was an update on the birdhouse. However, it was only with the satin stitches around the flip and fold. So it had that was it. And those are some of the parts that are okay. So there was no other updates for this house. So that wasn't the issue. So I did find someone else that did a YouTube video on some of the Lori Holt blocks, and her stitching came out just like my stitching. Her bird, while it looks like it should be more of a decorative stitch, hers looks just like mine. Her windows look just like my windows, even though I feel like they should look like this. If you can see, I know it's in plastic, but you can see how this decorative stitching is a little bit more pronounced, and it's on all of the ones that I've done so far. So you can see, I mean, you can at least tell there's a decorative stitch, whereas the birdhouse, not so much. So I think this is just the way this block stitched out. And actually, the video that I saw was for the larger house, so it looks like whether you're doing the small or the large, this one just didn't seem to stitch out quite as nice as the other blocks. Anyways, so I have decided that I am not going to restitch that because I think it would just end up the same. So that's where I am on the birdhouse blocks. So now let's continue with the sashing blocks. So I have one more update on the birdhouse. I just knew that this couldn't have stitched out as bad as I thought. And so to do one last check, I brought up 2 files in Embroidery software. This file is the very first beehive, and this is the birdhouse that I just did. And you will notice that the decorative outline for the windows are different. So that was my mistake. The windows are not all the same. And this looks like it has kind of like a little oval detail. My windows, if I look at this and now look at the windows, I can kind of see where the little oval details probably should be. It's not, again, it's not a great stitch out. It kind of just, at first glance, looks like it's not a very, nice satin outline, but it is supposed to be a little bit different. And the more I've been looking at the roof, those look pretty good, and the chimney top. On the bird, again, I thought that was just not a very good satin outlining, and you can kind of see that it should be something a little decorative, or maybe it's just they didn't want it a complete solid outline, like, for example, like the roof, and so that's just what it looks like. However, I do note that if you look on the wing, you can see this chevron or zigzag detail, and I do have that mostly right here on this first part of the wing, and you can see as it goes around the wing, it still is not the greatest. And again, that might be my machine. I ended up taking my machine in to just do a regular maintenance. I have had my machine for about 1.5 years, and I haven't taken it for maintenance. So that, again, as I mentioned before, could be that this really would have stitched out nice. Maybe I just, needed my machine cleaned or whatever. So I'm more happy with looking at this birdhouse now and realizing that what I thought was supposed to be the same window is not. And so, that makes me happier. So I definitely won't restitch this. I think it's pretty close to what it should be. And other than a few of the tack downs that didn't get covered, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to move on. All right, so that's my third and final update on the birdhouse. I'm ready to stitch the sashing block 6 and 7, and I just got my machine back from being serviced, and there were a few issues, which is maybe why that birdhouse didn't stitch out as clean as I think it could have. And so I did have some little burrs or nicks that had to be buffed out. I had been having some problems with thread shredding, and so hopefully that's all taken care of. And knowing that now, when I'm done with all 12 of the house blocks, I may go ahead and restitch that bird house. I'll just see. But if not, I think it still looks great. And in a quilt, I think it's going to be fine. So now I'm ready to move on to the sashings. And I am using my 7x12 hoop. Again, I have a stabilizer, my stabilizer roll still attached. And so I have all of the excess loosened up so that my hoop can move and just hanging off the front. And that again just helps me save on stabilizer. And so what I need to do is come to embroidery and to my USB. And then I'm going to open the combined files folder for the sashing blocks. And I need to bring in sashing 6. I'm going to hit set. And I already have my hoop set to my 7x12. I am going to rotate this. So I'm going to edit and rotate. I'm going to rotate it to the left. And then I'm going to go ahead and move it all the way to the top, since I have my stabilizer towards the bottom, and that will just help me save the part that's not going to be stitched. Now, if I would have hit embroidery, I can have that selected and go to layout and move, and I can go all the way to the top and it won't let me go outside of the stitching area like it did just a second ago. So I'll select OK. Now I need to add the next sashing. So I'm going to go to return and add, go back to my USB, go back to the sashing folder and choose sashing 7. I will hit set and edit, rotate, and then I'll also rotate it 90 degrees to the left. And I think that that's enough room. I might move it down just a couple notches so that the fabric doesn't overlap, but if it overlaps a bit, that's not critical. It's not in the stitching. And so actually that should be good. So I will select OK and embroidery. And you could see if I was doing this just, on my own, I would probably add a third and stitch 3 at a time. Then I wouldn't necessarily have to have my roll still attached. But because I have all of this excess stabilizer that I'm not going to be stitching right now, I will cut my block off and then I'll have all of this to save and it'll still be attached to the roll. All right, so I like to go to the minus plus needle just again, so if I need to move forward or backwards, steps or stitches, I'm already at the screen. I'm not going to color group. I am just going to stitch one at a time. So let's start with the first block. It's going to do the placement for the batting. I will place my batting, tack it down, and then do a placement for the first pieces of fabric. So with the first piece of fabric, again, that always goes right side up. I'm just going to center it over the batting and line it right up with that placement. And then the second piece is right side down, and I will just line it right up on top of that and then run the tack down. After that tack down stitches, I am going to finger press and use an iron. You could just tape or spray or just use a roller or just finger press. I want to try to get it as flat as possible. And now it's going to do a tack down. The directions say to trim around the entire block. However, because this tack down goes past the stitching, if you try to trim the sides, there will be a big lump of fabric. And so this will all be taken care of when we trim the block to size. And so the only thing you need to trim is this right hand side I am going to trim the left hand side also because I am using strips of fabric. I'm on the last bit of this strip of fabric, but I think I have enough to do the next piece. And so I am going to trim on both the left and the right side. But again, it's most critical if you've cut your pieces to size to cut just the right side. Now it will do another placement line, and I will just repeat with the green and then the pink fabric. So I was just running this last piece of fabric, and this was the end of my width of fabric strip that I cut for all of these sashings. And you might be able to tell that it is probably about 1/8 of an inch short, and so it didn't catch this edge. I am just going to tape this because the final trim size is going to be about 1/4 of an inch or 1/8 of an inch inside of this, and so I think I'm going to be okay. I can see where my batting is, and it will be about 1/4 of an inch past that. So I'm super close. And so instead of unpicking this and starting my next strip, I'm going to chance it and stitch this out. I am going to tape this again to keep this down, but this has kind of been par for the course for this video. So I'm going to try it. I want to know a few things I don't think I've mentioned before. If you look right here on the sides of the yellow and the green, it overlaps this piece of fabric, which really it shouldn't. I've had a few of the sashing blocks go over into that. And I've noticed that other people that have stitched this have had the same issue. And so that's why I've been trying to press with an iron to get it as flat as I can. But I still have some of the stitching will go onto this part of the block. It looks, great on this side, but I don't think that's anything that I'm doing. I don't know, maybe the batting might be causing that because it can't lay quite as flat. But again, I've noticed others that have stitched the sashing blocks have had the same issues with some of their embroidery. So I think in the scheme of things, when it's in a quilt, no one's really going to know. And I'm not going to stitch it over because I don't think that's going to change anything. So I just wanted to note that. Then on this block, this was supposed to be the light pink thread, and I just didn't think it would show up because it's probably even lighter than the pink in the fabric. And so I chose just to use the darker pink that matched the side. And so that's a change from the directions, but that looks good. I was able to, again, tape this down, and this is my trimming line. So I just made it with that last part of the strip of fabric. So now I'll just do sashing 7. I pulled out 2 new strips to start using, and we'll get that finished up. So I have the sashings out, and I'm going to take them out of the hoop and pull this piece of tape off where it wasn't long enough. And then again, here is where my hoop ended. So if I would have cut my stabilizer to the size of my hoop, I would have lost about 8 inches. And now, since it's still attached to the roll, that's just more that I saved. But again, that's something that most people don't do. So now I can trim. This first one, I did a black outline, so I know where to trim, but I will double check the size. It should be right on because it's the last to be stitched. The second one, the last thread was the blue, and so I left the blue in. because I can see it. And then here you'll notice where this went over. And on the second one, you'll notice how nice that lines up. And I did try to be a little bit more, I guess, forceful when I was pressing and finger pressing this side open. Maybe that helped, or maybe that's just aligned a little bit better in the file. So now I will double check the size before I cut. So these need to be 3 inches wide, and you can see that's right on that stitching, and 6.5 inches long, and that's just perfect. So I will cut right on these stitching lines, and that's just perfect. All right, let's get these cut. Now for the block, I am using the ruler that's made for this, and so I need to line the seam between the grass and the sky up at the 1.5 inch mark on Lori Holt's ruler, and that then also will add a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So if you are not using the ruler that's made to cut this by Lori Holt, you will line up the 1 3/4 inch of a regular ruler along that seam line. Now you can see that the bottom tack down line of the grass lines up perfectly with that. I've centered so that I have a little bit of the tack down. You can see a little bit of the stark line. I have a little bit to the inside on the left side and a little bit to the inside on the right side. And again, that's just because all of the embroidery and the quilting has kind of, pulled it in a little bit. And then at the top, you can see there's quite a bit, but I'm not concerned about that because the most important measurement for cutting the block, the house block, is to have this seam lined up at 1.5 on her ruler or 1 3/4 on a regular ruler. Okay, so now I can just cut this. You can see on this block, I was not quite exactly even. I have a little bit more of the tack down showing on this side than this side. But the most important thing again for the house blocks is that the seam between the grass and the sky is at 1.5 inches on Lori Holt's ruler or 1 3/4 on a regular ruler. And that is good for this birdhouse. And then I have Sashings 6 and 7. I'll give these a press and we'll put these aside and continue on. I love them. And look at these cute little birds. All right. They look great.